This is the WJW podcast, brought to you by the Washington Jewish Week and Mid-Atlantic Media.
Welcome to the WJW podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Trudler. I'm joined today by Grammy-nominated singer and songwriter John Ondrasik, also known as Five for Fighting. Five for Fighting has released six studio albums and has a number of major hits. John recently wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal titled America's Invisible Hostage Crisis in Gaza, in which he focused on the situations involving the Americans that are still being held captive by Hamas, including Hersh Goldberg Poland and the others, and talked about some really deep-seated feelings about the situation and why it was so critical to ensure that they're not forgotten. John Ondrasik, thank you for taking the time to chat.
Nice to be with you, Aaron.
Thank you. So it seems to me anyway that there have not really been that many folks in the entertainment industry that have been outspoken following the October 7th Hamas attacks in Israel. You in particular, actually, conversely, have been very outspoken in a public and powerful way, and you have stood with Israel and for Israel in the aftermath of those attacks. You're not Jewish. And at that point, you had not been to Israel, although I know you've been there since then, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But can you talk about a little bit about why you felt it was so important to become this a voice for the pro-Israel community, to talk about the situation involving the hostages, talk about what happened on that horrific day, and curious to get your thoughts on why you think that there are so many people in the entertainment industry that have essentially sat on the sidelines since October 7th.
Yeah, it's certainly a historical disgrace and shame for our industry. The music business likes to pride itself on being on the front foot for human rights issues. You can look at certainly the music from the 60s and Live Aid, Sun City, even the concert for New York after 9/11, where every kind of living icon stood on that stage and supported America after 9/11. It is a historical disgrace, and it's not just non-Jewish artists. Some Jewish artists aren't saying anything, and to me, it's not about it's not really about Israel. It's about, hey, if people are raped and murdered and taken hostage at a concert, and families had their homes invaded and were tortured, and babies are put in ovens, is that hard to condemn? And it seems, unfortunately, for many in the arts, it is hard to condemn, because for me, the kind of Israel-Hamas war is a moral issue. It's not a political one. I wrote a song 3 years ago about the Afghan withdrawal, where America abandoned its own citizens and millions of Afghans who we promised to protect to the Taliban. That's not a political issue. That's a moral one. You don't abandon people you promised to protect to the Taliban. I wrote a song a couple years ago about Ukraine when Putin invaded Ukraine. And I went to Ukraine and I performed with Ukrainian orchestra in a bombed out airport. That wasn't a political message for me. It's like when tyrants invade their neighbors and try to decimate a democracy, that's a moral issue. That's who America's stood by throughout our history. And similar with October 7th. I didn't write a song right away about October 7th. Certainly I was horrified by everything that we saw. It reminded me of 9/11. But when I saw the collapse of so many of our kind of moral pillars, our institutions, certainly the media very quickly became propagandists for Hamas. Certainly our college campuses run amok with anti-Semitism, and members of Congress like Rashida Tlaib, who are, Hamas spokesmen. That really scared me. It angered me. And I wrote "We're Not Okay," the song, okay, and Israel shared it, and it became a song that kind of spoke to what we're talking about. But I don't look at this as a pro-Israel song. Actually, one of the heroes of the video was a Palestinian woman calling out Hamas for stealing the aid. I look at this as a pro-civilization song, just like I do the Afghan song, the Ukraine song. To me, they're all connected, because at the end of the day, and people have spoken about this, Israel's always the tip of the spear, but what this is about is a battle for civilization against those who want to tear it down, which is Iran, which is Hamas, which is Putin, which is frankly China. So to me, these are moral messages, and it shouldn't be hard to condemn Hamas. You shouldn't have to be Jewish to condemn Hamas. You should just be sane. But the fact that so many artists in the music industry have remained deathly quiet. The last image of my video was Martin Luther King saying, "Silence in the face of evil is complicity." And almost to a person, the music industry has been complicit in the aftermath of October 7th.
All right, let's talk a little bit about your trip to Israel, John. You just went for the first time this past April, and while you were there, you performed the song you just referred to, "Okay, We Are Not Okay," which, as you mentioned, you wrote following October 7th. You performed that song at Hostage Square in Tel Aviv in front of thousands of Israelis, including hostage families. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think you performed just hours before Iran's missile attack on Israel. While you were there that night, and I watched a video of it, it was very powerful, and you spoke to the crowd, and in your remarks, you said, "One does not have to be Jewish to condemn the evil that is Hamas," which is what you were just talking about. "One does not have to be Jewish to support Israel in their fight, our fight for freedom, democracy, life, civilization against those who want to tear it down." What did it mean for you to be able to perform that particular song to that particular crowd in that particular place?
It was very humbling. It was very surreal, very inspiring, very sad. It's kind of one of those things that you feel every emotion when you do it. The closest thing I can equate it to is when I performed Superman at the Concert for New York, for many families who'd lost loved ones in 9/11. And you're looking out at people suffering. You're looking at people in pain. But you also see through the music that they find a way to release and maybe find a little bit of solace. People were singing along with "Okay," and 10 feet in front of me were hostage family members holding the sign of their loved ones. When I was in Israel, I met with many of the hostage families and the IDF soldiers. So it was heartbreaking, but I'm proud of the fact that we did that. And I learned a lot about Israelis as well that night. As you mentioned, it was the night that Iran attacked, but I got off stage around 8:30. Well, before that, I'd never heard an announcement before a show. I played thousands of shows. I've never heard an announcement that was an event of missile attack. Take cover, find shelter. And nobody left. Not one Israeli left. I was ready to run to my hotel and hide under my bed. Not one person left. And then after the show, I walked off stage, and the head of the hostage forum, Rebecca, said, "John, you have to be in your hotel room by 11 o'clock because they're closing the airspace. You need to be in a safe room." So again, it was 8:30, and I had my son with me, and I talked to my Israeli entourage and some of my Jewish friends who'd come from America, and I said, "All right, you guys, we have to go to the hotel. It's going to get real bad." And true story, David, who was kind of leading our entourage, said, "But John, we have a dinner reservation." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Yeah, I've waited 2 weeks for this dinner reservation." And, that's who Israelis are. That's what I learned, that the day after that, the Iranian attack, people were on the beach playing volleyball. They were going to work. And I'm like, if this happened to America, first of all, half of America would be in Canada, and everyone would be, hiding under their bed. So it gave me that trip. And I think for me and my son, it was not only illuminating, but I think it changed me a little bit, to see people that have been under siege for thousands of years have this ability to have joy in the darkest of times. So it was, again, it was surreal. I'm glad we were there. We still have a lot to do to support the hostages and to win this fight. But yeah, certainly for me and my son, it was a trip we will never forget.
I think your experience that night is a stark reminder of not just the perseverance of Israelis, it's just a reminder also of the existential threats that they face on a regular basis. I mean, this is obviously unprecedented in many ways, that missile attack from Iran. But I'd spoken to people I know, relatives and friends who are in Israel, and they described the events of that evening and then the next day. And it syncs up with what you were describing, people on the beach playing volleyball. I mean, that's just they went on with their lives because that's what they do.
For sure.
If I'm not mistaken, while you were in Israel, you had the opportunity to meet with international human rights champion Natan Sharansky, who certainly knows a lot about being held captive, and I know has a lot of insight and information to share about the current situation involving the hostages. I'm curious if you can describe that experience and talk a little bit about what the two of you spoke about.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it was almost like meeting a religious figure. He's larger than life, even though he's a small man. And I was honored to talk to him. And, he does a lot of these meetings. But I think what was unique for our time together is people may not know he's Ukrainian. He was from Ukraine. So I had this video of me performing Can One Man Save the World in Ukraine that I mentioned earlier. And I mentioned to him, he goes, well, let me see it. He'd seen the OK video. So I showed him the Ukraine video, and he was really moved. And I think that kind of opened up a dialogue between us that was maybe a little more intimate and more personal. And he said something to me that day that I think was really important. He said, 20 years ago, somebody asked Mr. Sharansky, what is the greatest threat to Western civilization? And 20 years ago, he said, American academia. And so he knew, he got it because he'd lived it. Because, as he said, this is not necessarily just anti-Semitism. This is Marxism. This is anti-capitalism. It's no coincidence that most of the mobs, most of the teachers of the faculty, many of the presidents on our supposed elite college campuses, they're not just anti-Semitic, they're anti-capitalist. They hate America. And he saw that in the Soviet Union. That was the first step of communism, because it always starts at the academic institutions. And I think we're seeing that, and we've been seeing that in America for probably the last 2 decades. But since October 7th, I think more people are aware of what's actually going on there. So we have a lot of work to do this summer. We're going to college campuses. We're pushing back. We're going on offense. We're doing concerts at some of the worst offenders. We're putting the bullies on notice. We did one at MIT with Idan Reichel and Mattis Yahoo. So I think one thing that I've been saying is, I know it's so easy to be depressed and angry, and every Jewish person, everybody of heart should be angry and depressed. But we can't just sit here and lament what's going on. We have to fight back. We have to use the arts to fight back, because that's where we're losing. All these kids on TikTok who have been indoctrinated and brainwashed. They don't listen to speeches. They don't read the Wall Street Journal. It's the arts that give them another opinion, another idea. So there's a lot of things we have to do and connect these dots between Israel and Ukraine and Iranian dissidents, the women of Iran, the women of Afghanistan, the Uyghurs. So there's a lot to do, but the arts has to be a big part of it, or frankly, we're not going to win this culture war.
I want to keep on that topic for a little bit and picking up on something you talked before about moral messages. And I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into that. So we talked about, okay, we are not okay in response to October 7th. We talked about Superman, which has over 100 million hits on YouTube, which became somewhat of a 9/11 anthem. We talked about Blood in My Hands, about the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Can One Man Save the World, about Ukraine. You clearly seem to view music as a way to express your feelings and sentiments about world-changing events and supporting humanitarian efforts. Can you talk a little bit more about that and explain why you think music is such a good way to respond to these sort of monumental events through moving and meaningful words, and what sort of response have you gotten in conjunction with those efforts from the entertainment industry, from fans, et cetera?
Well, certainly, after Israel shared my video on their social media, I learned in a very small way what it's like to be Jewish in 2024. The vitriol, the hate, the threats. But I also got thousands of emails from Jewish people and Israelis around the world saying, thank you We thought we were crazy. You know, we supported, we marched, you know, for civil rights. We checked all the boxes. We, you know, and everybody's abandoned us. And after a while, you start wondering, well, is it true? Is there something? So I think, you know, I think having songs that speak for people who feel unheard can be significant. It was that way with the Afghanistan song. So many of our Afghan veterans felt gutted, betrayed by the abandonment of their brothers at war, and especially when our government was calling it an extraordinary success and forgetting about the fallen 13, they felt deeply gutted, some suicidal. But when you hear a song like that, you're like, okay, somebody gets it. Somebody's singing this. Someone has a platform. It gives those people, I think, some solace, some strength. And of course, throughout, you know, kind of history, what can crash through walls? You know, music and sports, right? Music and sports. For Russia, you know, Russia not being at the World Cup, you know, you don't have to be following much of anything in Russia to know, well, we're not at the World Cup. You know, music, you know, coming through through social media into places like Russia, into places like Iran, China. I just did a piece for the Epoch Times that's going to go into China, you know, letting people know, okay, there's people thinking about you. Music is the way to do that. Also, it's a way to get people to listen. You know, my songs, even though they're moral, of course, they're political in this day and age because everything's political. So, you know, of course, the media shunned Blood on My Hands. They embraced Can One Man Save the World? They've shunned the Israel song. But when I play it, and I whether it's on television or at shows, and I give context, here's what I'm talking about. People that may be on a different side of the aisle or whatever, they listen. And maybe they say, oh, well, I didn't really think about that. Maybe I don't agree, but I get where you're coming from. And without music in this tribal world, that's almost impossible to happen. So I think, and it's certainly not just my songs. I mean, what I wish is that people with higher platforms, you know, the Bruce Springsteens, the U2s, the Barbra Streisands, I wish they had written this song, because that would make a difference and it would empower others to do the right thing. But all I can do is what I can do, and hopefully more folks will, you know, sit back and realize that their silence will stick with them for the rest of their lives. But there's still time to do the right thing.
Okay, staying on the topic of music, and particularly your music, you're about to embark on a tour that's going to take you through August, September, and October. In fact, one of the stops on your tour is Washington, D.C. You'll be performing at the Lincoln Theater on August 13th. Can you talk about your feelings and your mindset as you prepare to embark on this marathon tour?
You know, it's just exciting. It's fun, you know, going on tour. My band, whether it's the rock band, which we'll be doing in August, or the string quartet in September, they're family members. They are incredible. They inspire me every night. There's nothing better for a musician. In my childhood passion was being a songwriter, to have people sing your songs back to you. But I also look forward to talking about some of these things. You know, certainly it's a fun show. We do a song for our troops. Everybody's singing, you know, there's laughs, but also we'll reflect on, you know, some of the things that are going on. You know, I'll play okay. I'll play Can One Man Save the World? And I think it's important to do that. So for me, it's a blessing, you know, 20 years after Superman in 100 years to still be doing this. And DC is always a very special show. You never know who's going to show up. There's always a few politicians, some media folks. So sometimes it goes off the rails, but it's always very special for us. So certainly that one has a circle around it. And I look forward to seeing, you know, everybody and anybody over the next couple months.
All right, John. Well, I wish you the best of luck as you embark on that tour and continue on this journey of music and moral messages. John Ondrasik, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
My pleasure. Thank you, Aaron.